and Israel. Oh no, it must be about Christ and his church. I mean, no, it's not. It's about a man and a woman. And it's not about marriage. It's about a man and a woman. A kind of sensuality which the Bible expresses powerfully, openly. Certainly, for me, kind of at the base of a lot of this, is the problem that most of us, and I include myself here too, not just you, I don't know any of you, about our own understandings of sexuality. We are very confused about that in our culture, I think. Very confused. Not quite sure how we relate one to the other sexually. It's very hard for us. It's hard for us. Now, in my case, I'll be 70 this summer. So I was raised, in a traditional home with a father who was very traditional. He taught me what it was like to be a man. Men don't cry, he said, which is absurd, but nonetheless he said it, so I never did. He never touched me, never hugged me, ever. Men don't do that. They don't do that. So I learned from my father to be distant, which meant that I lost a lot of what it meant to be a sexual human being. It took me a long time. My wife helped me with that one. She helped me, literally, to learn what that meant. Now, because we are bombarded in the culture with all manner of imageries, aren't we? All manner of imageries. You can't watch a TV show for 5 minutes without somebody jumping in bed with somebody else. And with divorce and remarriage and all kinds of things happening all the time. It's part of our culture. It's part of our culture now. But it makes it very hard then to get a clear notion of what it means to be committed and devoted to a person. My wife and I have thought through this over and over. We've been, as I said, married almost 47 years. And part of the reason we have been married so long is that we have regularly thought carefully about what it meant to choose one another. We both know that there probably are 5,000 other people in the world we could have been with. Probably. Maybe more, I don't know. But we made this choice. And we had a hard time about 20 years ago. We were separated for almost a year because we were in a really hard time. But we got back together because we kept thinking about what we'd said when we got married. We kept thinking about that. We kept focusing our attention on that. We were so concerned about making those words count. And now they really count. They count for us. Now, that's only because we were fortunate in a lot of ways. Really, really fortunate. But we were also fortunate that we loved one another deeply. And we knew that even when we were apart. We knew there was something very profound in there that we didn't want to lose. And thank God we didn't. But that took work, effort. I needed all kinds of help to make me a stronger, richer person than I was. I needed help. And so did she. We both did. And we got it, and it worked beautifully. But the Genesis account is not about marriage. It's what is Genesis 1, 2, 3 about? Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is about why the world you and I live in got all mucked up. I mean, it started off so well, male, female, animals, plants, everything's just fine, everything's balanced, ordered, structured, and designed, and then things fell to pieces. Why did they fall to pieces? And they fell to pieces in Genesis 3. Didn't take very long, 10 verses or so. And the snake comes up to the woman and says, God said he couldn't eat from any tree in the garden, and we know that's not what God said. God said you eat from every tree in the garden, except that one over there in the middle. When you eat from that one, you're going to die. And no, snake, that's wrong. No, we can eat from every tree, except that one over the middle, because we can't even touch that one. She's made that up, of course. God didn't say anything about touching the tree. So we can't even touch it. And now the snake knew he had her. Oh, you're not going to die, he said. Because God knows. Everybody in the story seems to know what God knows, God knows that the day you eat from that tree, you're going to be like God. You're going to know everything. Ooh, there's an offer one can hardly refuse. So the woman walks over to the tree, and she grabs some fruit, and she eats, and she hands some to her husband, who's standing there with her, says the text. I wonder what he's been doing all this time. Anyway, what does he do? Eats. Belly-oriented at best, I guess. Eats. And then their eyes are open, and they knew they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves, aprons to cover themselves. And some of you, I trust in Boerne, Texas, probably know what fig leaves feel like. Those of you who don't, I had 3 fig trees in my backyard in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And fig leaves feel like number 2 grade sandpaper. You would not have one on very long if you were starting. When the Hebrews told that story, they all burst into laughter every single time. Because they knew that when human beings try to be like God, they're going to sew fig leaves to solve their problem. That's what the story's about. It's about why the world is not the way God wants it to be. And it begins the whole Bible story, which ends in Revelation chapters 21 and 22 with an enormous account of the great city, 10,000 miles high, 10,000 miles wide, 10,000 miles long, and the gates of the city are open 24 hours a day, and there's no sun or moon in it because God and the Lamb are the light of the city. The world has gone back to the beginning of creation again in Genesis 1. That's where you and I are. We're in the middle of that. So the choice for us in the Bible is whose side are you on? You on God's side or somebody else's? Are you moving the world toward wholeness, shalom, or are you fighting against the shalom of the world? Is everybody welcome in your city at the end, or are you keeping people out in your city at the end? God's desire is for all to be in the city at the end, all, with the gates wide open. So, to me, the Bible begins in this great story of trees and leaves and all that stuff, and it ends with a story of tree and leaves in Revelation 21, where it's a great arc of a tale, and you and I are in the middle of it. We're still in the middle, deciding whose side we're on. Christians need always to believe that God is active in the world. Now, I know it's hard for those of us who are scientific and rational and all that. I'm scientific and rational, for heaven's sakes. I mean, once we were the product of the Enlightenment in the 16th, 17th centuries, everything was done by science, everything's historical, and that's the way it is. And I know how people think like that. I think like that too. But we Christians have to believe that God is active in life. God's doing something with us now, right now. I know I've heard Christians say this, oh, God has no hands but our hands. That sounds very religious, doesn't it? Until you look at your hands. Oh my gosh, this all God's got? We're in all in big trouble. You might as well break out the booze and start dancing, you know what I mean? My hands, that's all God's got? If there's not more to the world than my hands and our hands together, we're doomed. God has to be doing something active in the world. God's moving the world. Martin Luther King was right about this. The world is moving. It's a great arc, and it bends toward justice. I believe that with all of my heart. And I know it's really hard to believe sometimes. The newspaper doesn't show that. I believe the world is moving toward justice. It doesn't mean I'm Pollyanna. It means that I see things happening in the world that are part of the work and world of God. I know it happens. I see it all the time. But you got to have your eyes open. You're not going to see much of that in the newspaper or on TV. The crawl doesn't have a lot of stuff about the justice of God. So, all of that's to say that to me, Genesis 1, 2, 3 is a brilliant piece of writing. Brilliant piece of writing. And it sets up the whole Bible story about how you and I, because Adam and Eve, Adam and Hawa is the Hebrew, it means you and I. Adam means every person, and Hawa means the mother of all life. So it's all of us here in this room, male and female, all of us are in that story. And we are the ones who, when we are told not to eat from the tree, would just jolly well love to do it. And we do it, and we grin a mile as we do it, and then we sew fig leaves to cover our nakedness, and God comes and, what have you done? Well, the snake made me do it. Not my problem, your problem. And God says to the woman, what have you done? Well, snake made me do it. Man, what have you done? Woman made me do it. We're all separated and divided because we don't take responsibility. It's the world I know. I've seen that world. I'm in that world. I know that. And instead of deciding it's really my responsibility, I'm willing to blame it. I was severely toilet trained when I was young, and so that's the problem. No, actually it's not. I want the cookies, that's why. I want the tree. I want to eat the tree. And that's just entail, that is. And isn't it sad that it got turned into some sort of hard theological thing about original sin or something? Baloney. It's my story. It's me. We're talking about me. I get it. I get it. I'm not sure you even think about it. Okay? Other questions? Yes?
How do I reconcile the belief that God doesn't change, and your message is that as the culture's changed over 1,500 years, and the worldview changed, as the writing changed, when the writing is the Word of God?
Exactly. Well, there are a couple of ways to answer that question, and let me give you a possibility. This is a theological question, of course. The traditional understanding of the nature of God is that God is unmovable, unchangeable, etc. That was a gift of the theologians of the Middle Ages who gave us that one. There are now theologians in the last 150 years or so who are asking whether that is the right way to think about God at all. It could be, some of them say, that God is involved in our evolution as well. There is a part of God which is God, but there is a part of God which is part of us. And they don't call it pantheism, the truth of God everywhere. They call it panentheism, which means that we are all part of God. That is to say, there is a part of God which is not us, but we are all part of God. And that means that God is profoundly affected by what we do. And the Bible has a lot of that, doesn't it? You know, there's this famous line in Genesis in chapter 6, right before the flood comes. Wonderful business there. It's a terrific story. Everybody in the ancient East had the story of the flood. Everybody had it, except for the Egyptians. There's no flood story of the Egyptians, because the Nile rose and set and never flooded. But in the Mesopotamian valley, the floods were prominent, powerful. Tigris, Euphrates were out of control of the rivers lots of times. And so the flood story certainly came from there. Well, they had to tell that story. The Hebrews had it, so here's how they did it. They started off like this. And God looked at the world, this is Genesis 6:5, and God said, every imagination of the thoughts of all human beings was evil all day long. That was from God. God says this. The world's filled with trash. There's trash everywhere. Trash. It's an inclusive statement of universal sin. Okay? Now, in the midst of all that, God chooses Noah not because Noah's good, just because God chooses Noah. That's what it said, basically. And then, so the flood comes, and everything's wiped out, except for the ark, and except for the animals, and except for Noah's family. And then the flood lasts. There are two stories told in there, and they're kind of intertwined, and sometimes not all that clearly. But the flood lasts a certain amount of time, and Noah's boat eventually lands on the mountains, plural, of Ararat. I wish those guys in Arlington, Texas would stop looking for the ark. It's absurd. But anyway, the mountains of Ararat, very tall mountains, 19,000 feet plus in Turkey. And they landed on the mountains, and then Noah hops out of his ark, animals go, a family comes out, and Noah offers a sacrifice to God. And the text says, and so when God smelled the pleasing odor, medium rare, just like I like it, then God said this, I will never again destroy the human beings, even though they are evil from their youth. Now wait a minute, wasn't that why the flood came in the first place? Because they were evil from their youth, and now God says after the flood is over, I will never again destroy them because they're evil from their youth. Now the question is, in text, who changes because of the flood? The answer is, God changes. Not us. We're the same garbage we always were. And it's a good thing that the God you and I worship is not a God who rewards us and punishes us for what we deserve, and we'd all be toast. I mean, that's what it says. That's what the Bible says over and over and over again. Yeah.
You mentioned in Sodom and Gomorrah the reference to men versus the people. And I'm curious because I actually had a professor at Baylor who taught the same thing. But nobody's ever changed it. Or
Excellent question.
If it's common knowledge, why don't we see these things change?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I can only say the answer is there is a deep prejudice running around in translators. Well, I can't say anything else. Because you're quite right. People have known this for 150 years. That it's clear that this word, they know this. It does not mean one man. It means human being. Why don't they translate it that way? Why did every translation, one right after the other, goes right through this? Even the NRSV, which was only done 25 years ago. Why don't they do something about this? And I really can't answer the question. I don't know. I can only say that I think there is a deep prejudice in the translators here, and I think there's a prejudice against gay and lesbian people. That's all I can think of. I can't think of anything else, because that's not what the words say. They just don't.
Do you see other words change in different versions or updated versions?
Well, unfortunately, as I tried to show you tonight, the big ones don't. Those words stay the same. Yes, there are. For example, some translations try to make the language more inclusive. They try to say that when a word is like "anche" is used, that you don't translate it man, you translate human being. That's certainly been done. So people have tried to make more inclusive the language about God, for example. That God is, for some people, awkward to be translated as male all the time. Why do we have a God as male all the time? When there are a series of images in the Hebrew Bible, particularly, that talk about God as a female. Why don't we allow more of that? So that's happening in some translations too. That seems to be okay. But this one, I think has resisted change. And I can't answer why.
Just like Paul had the word sodomite and he didn't use it.
No, sure, that's right. There's not a word like that at all. There's no word like that. This is made up. It's made up.
So that's modern translators.
That's a modern translator
putting words in
dropping
there.
that into the text. And I can only say it is because of a deep prejudicial sense of relationships, of same-sex relationships. I don't know what else to say. It seems that way. And that makes me very sad. Very sad. Because people who can't read these languages will then go to translations and they'll read what they read. And that's what they read. They say this.
You've offered us a very good rational explanation about these words and all. And I sit down with a person who's very prejudiced against this.
Good.
I don't get anywhere with them.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Excellent comment. And I meant to say that really at the beginning. And I've had the same experience exactly. That is to say, this is not a rational question, primarily. Because it's lower down in the guts, isn't it? There's something very deep about people's sexuality. Very deep. And I am a raging heterosexual. And so, if I was raised in such a way as to say that anything that wasn't that was somehow really bad. So, I've had over the years, because I'm a singer, I did a lot of opera and a lot of musical comedy in my early life, and I was with a lot of gay people. Because there are a lot of gay people who sing and dance and play. And so, I was privileged to be able to be with human beings who happened to be gay. And what that did was just open my eyes in ways that nothing else would have, I think. So I don't think I would have been convinced by arguments like this either. There's something very deep about this. You're quite right about that. Quite right. And all that I can say about that is just you just have to keep at it. You have to be sensitive and helpful as you can be, and know you're going to get rebuffed. A lot of times, you're just going to get rebuffed. It's the nature. It's the nature of this question, because it is a very profoundly emotional, very profoundly emotional. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah.
I think attached to that, at least for my own self, is how one goes about, and it's deep emotion, how one goes about and loving those that you love. Like, Liz and I got married September 25th, but I'm sitting here, and I can pull up the emails that my niece sent me about how our lives are one with God.
Yeah.
And so it's how you reconcile that pain, and so maybe I'm speaking for others as well, of the ones that you love.
Yeah, indeed.
So I don't know if I just
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for that comment. Your lives are witnesses that you are allowed to love who you love. And you don't need to be infuriated by what people say to you. You don't need to reject out of hand what they say, but you need to say to them, I know who I love, and now I have the privilege of being with this person for the rest of my life. And I'm very grateful to God for that. To be a Christian, to be a gay person and a Christian at the same time is the best thing that you can do. The very best thing you can do. Because once people see that there are gay Christians, that maybe the prejudice will begin to drop. Maybe, but sometimes it won't. I know that. I mean, I'm not naive about this. But, and I'll be honest with you, I'm sure you feel the same way. I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime, ever. I was astonished when that happened. Absolutely astonished. And thrilled. But I knew it wasn't the end of the road. It was the start of another road. And I think all of us now have to live in this new reality. And maybe I'll be dead, and you'll be dead, and all of us in this room will be dead before significant change among some people happens. Maybe. And maybe I can only hope that in 3 generations, this is going to be seen like slavery. I mean, whoever imagined that slavery was right? Whoever imagined that women should not be treated equally with men? I mean, whoever imagined that? Well, I'll tell you who imagined it. We did. We all imagined it.
Those are changes in interpretation.
Exactly. They're changes in interpretation.
Which is important, it seems to me.
Exactly.
Because so many people say, well, you can't change the interpretation of Scripture.
Well, you can't. Yeah, you certainly can't.
Because it happens all the time.
That's right. Of course it does. And it happens all the time. Absolutely right about that. Those passages that were used, the ridiculous thing like the curse of Ham and slavery in Genesis chapters 9 and 10 is just ridiculous, absurd. But it ruled the way people thought about African American people for 250 years. And it's still, I might add, last year I was doing something over in Alabama or Georgia. I was driving through South Georgia, and I heard some preacher talk about the curse of Ham. It was, again, as if it were true. I mean, black people need to be in their place, and they're cursed forever and all that. Oh my gosh, what, 2014? I mean, it was just astonishing to me. But that means, of course, that those prejudices are very deep, very deep. And after having an African-American president now for almost 8 years, you can see how deep they are. How really profound they are. They're really in there. They really are. And they're not going to change overnight. That wasn't the end of the road. That was the beginning of another road. But it wasn't going to change things. So I think the same thing. We're facing the same thing now with this problem. But again, it's down here, isn't it? It's this emotion people feel. Emotion. Let me tell you one story. We're a little over time here, but my wife was a pastor. Her first pastorate when she served in the 1990s in a suburb of Dallas. And there was a man in the church. She preached a sermon, which was fairly mild. It wasn't really advocating homosexual relationships are okay. She simply used an example, I think, of a gay relationship as one of her examples in the sermon. And one of the men in the congregation got very angry and wrote her a really, really unpleasant letter, sort of single-spaced, kind of scrawled and furious and all that. So she asked him to come and talk to her about this, but she was afraid. He was a very big man, and she's not very big. And so she asked me to come along. I'm not very big either. I'm good. But anyway, so I was out in the hall while they were in their office, and I think it was a fairly civil conversation. I don't think it didn't turn out too badly. But anyway, he still came out of there and was completely unconvinced and all that. So I asked him the question. Here's the question I asked him. Let me give you a scenario. When Diana leaves the church and you have another pastor, let me give you 2 options for your next pastor. 1, a gay man committed to a man, having lived together for a long time, having been glorious work in the community, marvelous this, I mean, when I really played this up big, right? And then, or a philandering heterosexual guy who sleeps with 3/4 of the women in the congregation and has been married 4 or 5 times and is ready to divorce his 5th wife. Which one would you choose? The heterosexual, he said, like that. So, you can see how deep the prejudice is. I mean, I was astonished, but not really. Not really. Yes?
I kind of have an opposite question. I have a lot of people in my life right now who struggle with homosexuality things, and they have problems. They find it hard to believe in God because they feel like as much pain
Sure.
and
Absolutely.
in the church that has happened.
Yeah.
What would you say to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
other side of that?
Well, I would say this, the question, you hear the question, people are feeling tremendous pain about their gay relationships, and they've been told that they're evil and God is against them and all of that, so they feel such pain about this. They don't want to go to church or have anything to do with God at all. What do you say about that? Well, there are always, of course, 2 responses to this, right? I would never say to somebody, who expressed a thing like that, well, you need to hang in there. I would never say that. And I've heard people say this, oh, hang in there, it's going to get better. No, I would never say that. I mean, one of the options is to chuck it. I mean, people who are being abused and they worship a God who abuses them, well, believe me, the God that's represented by some of these people, I would never want to worship such a God. Would you? I mean, what kind of a God is that? A God of hatred? A God who sends people to hell, writhing for eternity? It's just appalling to me. But you might also say, but the other option, of course, is to stay on the bus. If you can understand that God that's being represented is not the God of the Bible, nor is it the God of Christianity, nor the God of Jesus Christ, that the God that's being portrayed to them is not the God that Christians have traditionally worshipped. Now I know. I know. A couple of weeks I'm going to do this series of Sunday school lessons exactly on that. The title of my series is, Will the Real God of the Universe Stand Up? Because for me, that's where it all starts. How you understand who God is will determine how you address this question, and every question. And I think a lot of people just don't look at that very closely. I'm going to ask them straightforwardly, as I would ask you. When you bow your head this Sunday in church and pray the Lord's Prayer, to whom are you talking? What does that being look like for you? At all? I mean, who is it? I really think we have to wrestle with that one more than we have done. Over the years of my teaching, this question, of course, when you're in a seminary, people ask these questions. I mean, because they're concerned, and particularly if they've come with a fairly narrow view from a church experience that they've had in a place or another, and then they come and they hear all this wild talk out of weird people like me, and they think, oh my gosh, I mean, how can you be a Christian and think like that? Well, I really am. I'm a Christian. I really am. I love Jesus, right? I do. And they say, how can you love Jesus and think like that? Well, then the question's going to rise. You say, begin to think about this. Let me tell you how I understand what God is like, and who God is, and how you can understand God in a way differently. Tell me about your God. Let's have some dialogue. The advantage, for me at least, of staying on the bus is that. And frankly, the United Methodist Church, I'm just furious with the church. I'll be honest with you. It's exhausting to me and particularly when the United Methodist Church has now announced, this slogan that they've got, open minds, open lives, open doors. Yeah. What hypocrisy is not? It's not. That's just terrible to me. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. I worship in a Presbyterian church. My wife and I go to the First Presbyterian Church of Dallas, and we do that because they have made a decision about this, which I think is the right decision. And we have gay members of the church who get married in the church by the pastor. The United Methodist Church in Dallas, there's a church called North Haven United Methodist, which is very open, very liberal, a lot of gay and lesbian members there. The pastor is married to a judge in town. His wife can do marriages and he can't. Now tell me, a pastor of a church cannot perform the weddings of his members? Oh, that's mind-blowing to me. Mind-blowing. You assign me to a church and tell me I can't be the pastor? That's what that says, right? Directly. So, there's no easy answer to this. I mean, I cannot feel the pain of people who have been abused like this, because I have not been. I'm a man, I'm a heterosexual man, so I'm in the in crowd. So, I can't say what the pain of that one is, and that's why I would never say to somebody, oh, hang in there. I would never say that. But I would say that there are options if one is willing to get at it, work at it. This stuff, theology is a hard game. It takes time to take your faith seriously. You don't learn things overnight with this stuff. Ask these seminarian type what that's like. I mean, there are just all kinds of issues that arise, and some very uncomfortable ones, very uncomfortable ones. So I think anybody who's a member of a church, I've always said this, they need to dedicate themselves to learn as much as they can about the faith that they profess, so that they will know when they say, I am a believer in Jesus Christ, what that really means for them. Let me tell
we've gone over. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Let me say one more thing. I forgot. There's a lovely book written by a guy named Jack Rogers. Here it is. It's called Jesus, the Bible, and Homosexuality. Jack Rogers was a very conservative Presbyterian who was totally opposed to gay ordination in his denomination, totally opposed to gay marriage for years and years. And he had a tremendous change of heart. And he describes in this book what happened to him. And then he looks at these passages that we've looked at. He looks at Christian history. He's an historian. He's got a PhD in history. And he looks at these things. And I found this book wonderful to read, and I'd recommend it to you. Jesus, the Bible and Homosexuality by Jack Rogers, who's a now retired guy from Fuller Seminary in California. He's still conservative, theologically, he really is. But he now believes that his former belief is wrong.
As you leave, let me just say one thing. We thank you, Dr. Holbert, so much. And I do want to say there's some flyers on the table as you leave. And a spiral.
If you want to sign, if you want more information from P-Flag in Boerne, just put your name, your first name, and some email information, and we can even include you in our email.
We meet the second Thursday of every month at 211 Tyson Street here in town. Tyson, sorry. Tyson Street. And we welcome you. There is a bus in Boerne, and it's called P-Flag. And there are some other places, inlets of support where you can experience God's grace and love. If you'd like to know more about that, see me afterwards. So go in peace, and thank you, Dr. Holbert.